I never should have come to this town. I've seen the worst of humanity as a cop. But this town, it made me see that there are horrors beyond what humans can dream. I don't know what your shifts were like back in Columbus, but the night shifts here tend to get pretty weird, Anderson said. Taking a long drag of a cigarette, there was a sign in the briefing room that said no smoking. But the ashtray in the center of the conference table told me that nobody actually cared. It's fine. I can handle weird things, I told him. But my answer just seemed to make Anderson laugh. That's what they all say, kid. Look, there's Columbus weird, and then there's heaven weird. Believe me when I say they are two completely different animals, and it's best if you don't ask too many questions about them. I couldn't help but find his tone a bit condescending. He talked to me as if it was my first day out of the academy. Not like I've been doing this for 5 years. Granted, it was my first day in heaven, but I didn't think that was any excuse to talk to me like I was born yesterday. Looking back, maybe it was a mistake to pull up my roots and move out to heaven. Oh. But I had my reason for getting out of Columbus, the Heaven Police Force. It was hiring, and I thought that starting fresh in some small town might do me some good. Even as Anderson talked down to me, I still told myself that this was just a bad first impression. Once I'd earned my spurs and proved I wasn't some kid with nothing between his ears, he'd change his tune with me. I just needed to earn it. Just follow the rules and you'll be okay, Anderson said. It's that simple. Yeah, sure thing, I said. You know, I was actually doing a bit of reading up on the local. Not those rules, Anderson scoffed. I mean, yeah, those rules too. But I'm talking about the rules for the night shift. Nobody filled you in on those. The confused look on my face seemed to answer his question. He shook his head in exhaustion. Geez, they're really just hiring anybody these days. All right, well, I'll run through them with you. It's pretty simple stuff. The long and short of it is that the church is out on Aspen Park Road. Has a sort of special arrangement with the department, so there's a few unique rules in place with them. Okay, what are the rules? I asked. Like I said, it's pretty simple stuff. Rule number 1 is that anything out of place you might see around Aspen Park Road, area goes directly to Officer Dean Norris. And I do mean anything. I don't care what you think you see out there. We don't touch it. It goes to Officer Norris, and only to Officer Norris. Okay, noted, I said. But why? Because Officer Norris knows how to deal with those people. That's why. Rule number 2. Under no circumstances are you to ever directly respond to or engage with anything you might see around Aspen Park Road. I don't care what it is. I don't care what you think you see. You don't respond to it. You don't engage with it. You make a note and then you. He gestured to me, waiting on a response. Pass it off to Officer Norris. I finished. Atta boy. You pass it off to him. Rule number 3. If we run into anyone outside of the Aspen Park Road, area with a tattoo of a dove skull on that left arm, we do not touch them. We let them go. They are with the church, so like everything else, they go through Norris. I had some questions about that, but figured it was probably best not to ask them right away. Rule number 4, we don't enter the church without permission. And rule number 5, we stay off Aspen Park Road between the hours of 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. So, what? We just don't patrol that area. I asked. We do not. But why not? Because that's part of the agreement. Look, don't pick it apart, all right? Just trust me. The rules are there for a reason. Don't think too hard about it. Don't poke around asking questions. We do our patrol shift, and any problem that isn't covered by the church's rules we deal with normally. Trust me, most of the time you won't even need to think about the church. I thought, if we wouldn't even need to think about it, why make such a fuss over the church and its special rules then? The whole thing struck me as a little weird, but what was I going to do about it? Anderson spoke with the confidence of a man who knows the reason for these rules. So maybe it was better to just accept them than go about my business. Besides, if he was right and I barely even needed to think about the church, it probably wouldn't even come up again, right? Still, this whole thing didn't sit well with me. Why have some arbitrary set of rules on how to deal with one local church? It didn't make a whole lot of sense. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe this was some dumb prank. Yeah, could be. Maybe it was some sort of hazing. It wasn't very professional, but at least that made more sense. I tried to take Anderson's advice and just not think about it. I figured that on the off chance, this whole thing wasn't a dumb joke. There'd be some obvious, simple reason behind these rules that would make sense. Yeah, that had to be it. It had to be. Unsurprisingly, during my first couple of weeks on shift, the church on Aspen Park Road was a non-issue. We passed by the area, but we rarely ever drove down the road itself. And I only actually saw the church on a couple of occasions. At a glance, it didn't look like anything special. The Church of the Sacred Dove was a boxy white brick building with a large chapel and a sloped roof. I probably wouldn't have even noticed it existed if it didn't have that set of special rules. My nights on patrol in heaven were a little quieter than my shifts in Columbus had been. We'd only get a few calls per night. We usually dealt with drunks, noise, and minor disputes. The most excitement we had during those first few nights. There was an incident downtown. Some drunk moron flashed a gun at a bar after the bartender tried to cut him off, and that was it. I'd almost completely forgotten about the rules, Anderson told me. So when I saw my first weird sign out by Aspen Park Road, I was ready to call it in as normal before he stopped me. It had been a quiet night, even by heaven's standards. Anderson had pulled into a strip mall to pick up a pack of cigarettes, some cheap coffee, and to have a chat with the owner. He stopped off at that same store every couple nights. The owner usually gave him the scoop on anything of interest happening in the area. Not that there was usually much. Well, while he had his chat that night, I stayed outside for a cigarette. Standing in the cool night air, I took a long drag. I couldn't deny it. There was kind of peace out there under the stars. It was the kind of night I'd been dreaming of when I'd moved out here. It was beautiful. And as I stood under those stars, that's when I heard it. The distant sound of screaming. I paused, lowering my cigarette before walking out further into the parking lot. The screaming was faint, but it was there, and I could smell something burning in the wind. Not my cigarette. Something else. I found myself wandering toward the edge of the parking lot, following the sound and the smell. I threw away my smoke as I got closer and closer to the road. There was something about that smell. It was weak but distinct, sickening and sweet at the same time. It was a smell I could almost taste in the back of my throat. It was familiar, but not in a good way. It brought back a vivid memory I had of an incident back in Columbus where some drunk idiot had run his car off the road. There had been a fuel leak by the time we got there. The car had already caught fire. The blaze had turned the car into a burning coffin. I was one of the officers on the scene at the time, and I remember that smell that had filled my nostrils. Burning flesh. What I was smelling now, it reminded me of that. Why, Joey? The sound of my own name tore me away from my thoughts. I looked back towards Anderson. He was standing by the cruiser, a cup of coffee in each hand. "You hear that?" I asked. Anderson was silent for a moment before quietly opening the driver's side door. He didn't say a word to me. He just got in the cruiser. I paused before going to join him. I expected to see him fiddling with the radio, but he just keyed the engine. It was coming from the west, I said. There was a smell, too. It was hard to describe. I'm not sure what it was. "Don't worry about it," Anderson said. My brow furrowed. "What? Why not?" I asked. "Church stuff. This kind of thing happens every now and then. Just make a note of it and pass it along to Officer Norris. We're not going to have a look." I asked. I heard people screaming." "It's a part of that mass or something," Anderson said. "Look, don't ask me for details. I don't know anything about it. I just know that it's how they worship. Screaming, fire. You get used to it." "What kind of church is that?" I asked. "What did I just say, kid? Don't ask me for the details. I don't know. And trust me when I tell you that it's better off that way. Leave a note for Norris and you'll have a chat with him, all right?" That answer didn't sit well with me. I didn't like it in the slightest. But what was I going to do? Argue? Anderson had already put on the radio, probably in an effort to end the conversation. He started driving in the opposite direction of Aspen Park Road. Half an hour later, he was chatting with me like nothing had happened. Like I just imagined the screaming and the burning smell. It was odd, jarring. It was obvious he wanted me to drop it. But look, I didn't become a cop to just turn a blind eye to stuff like this. Maybe it was just some sort of weird outdoor mess. I knew I wouldn't be able to let it go until I knew for sure. When my shift ended, I went home to sleep. For a couple hours, I woke up again sometime past noon. The memory of the faint screams and the smell of burning stayed in my mind. I sat up in bed. Anderson and I had made a note in our end of shift report that we'd heard something coming from Aspen Park Road area. But that was really all we'd done, and I didn't feel like it was enough. Maybe I was just overthinking all this. Anderson, let's be real. He wasn't the best cop I'd ever worked with, but he seemed all right. If he wasn't worried about this, why should I be worried? The rules about the church were weird, sure, but there had to be a logical explanation for all this. I probably was just overthinking it. Probably, but I had to be sure. Maybe going for a little walk along Aspen Park Road would put my mind at ease. No uniform, no badge, no gun. Just me going for a walk. Nobody would give me any grief for that, right? Just a nice walk along Aspen Park Road. Nothing out of order. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, that should be fine. I grabbed my jacket and my wallet and I went out for a walk. My apartment wasn't too far away. It was about half an hour away, and I could probably use the exercise. There had been a light dusting of snow that night. It finally felt like winter as I walked through town. The wind kicked up flurries of powdered snow around my feet as I got closer to Aspen Park Road. In daylight, there really didn't seem to be anything all that special about it. It was a normal ST, on the edge of the more suburban part of town. The church and its property dominated a good stretch of the road. The other side of it was dense forest. Further down was a neighborhood development that couldn't have been more than, 10 years old. The strip mall Anderson and I had stopped off in was just a couple of streets over as I wandered under the church's property. I couldn't help but feel like I was trespassing, although I'm not entirely sure why I felt that way. The rules had said we weren't supposed to enter the church uninvited, but they didn't say anything about walking across the property. And, really, that was all I was doing, taking a scenic stroll across an open lot. I wasn't harming anyone. I wasn't causing any kind of disturbance. I was just walking across the property. There wasn't anything wrong with that, was there? This was a church. Not Area 51. I wandered across the lawn behind the church, not really sure what I was looking for. Evidence of something, I suppose. Maybe I'd know it when I saw it. Maybe as I crossed the field behind the church, my eyes were drawn to the woods out back. I paused, staring at them, and then I noticed something in the snow, some sort of clearing. It looked like there was a large bonfire pit in the middle of it. Now this looks interesting. I glanced back at the church to make sure nobody was watching me before making my way over. I was right near the bonfire pit. Someone had been burning something there. Judging by the blackened remains of wood, it had been used recently. Now, by itself, the bonfire pit really wasn't all that suspicious. Anderson had mentioned that fires were part of their masses. This had probably just been where they'd been hosting it, but the memory of the screaming and the burning still stuck with me. The mass hadn't sounded like anything I'd ever heard before. Maybe I shouldn't have been hung up on that, but I was. Maybe if it was just the screaming, I could have let it go. I don't know. But that smell still bothered me, I've only smelled it once before, and I've heard people say that you never forget it. Maybe it was nothing. I wanted it to be nothing, but I had to know for sure. I crouched down beside the bonfire. I brushed through the snow and the ash, still unsure what I was looking for. Maybe I was looking for nothing at all. Nothing would be proof that this was, nothing to worry about. My fingers brushed against something hard, and I fished it out. What I found was a small bone. Bleached by fire, my stomach lurched as I examined it. There was no denying what this was. It was a bone, although it was hard to say exactly where it came from. This could have easily been an animal bone by itself. Well, it didn't confirm anything, but that didn't help the uneasy feeling in my gut. I turned the bone over in my hands. I studied it, as if staring at it would help me figure out where it had come from. And that was when I heard the voice behind me. "You're a little late for Mass, aren't you?" I stood up, putting the bone in my pocket as I did. There was a woman standing behind me. She had narrow brown eyes and auburn hair that flickered like fire in the snow. She wore a white dress with no coat, despite the cold. I noticed a tattoo on the inside of my wrist. Some sort of bird skull, I think. I didn't get a good look at it. "Oh, huh. Sorry. Just out on a walk. I was just curious because I am. I thought I saw a new fire pit. I'm new in town, by the way. I'm just sort of looking for places, to meet people," I said. None of what I said came out smoothly, and I tried to laugh off the awkwardness. The woman just continued staring at me, smiling calmly. "It's quite all right," she said. "My name is Harmony. It's a pleasure to meet you." "I'm Joey," I replied. "No cold. You gotta be freezing." Her smile didn't change. "I don't mind the weather," she said softly. "You're new in town. I don't recognize you." Yeah, I just moved here. I was actually looking for a new church to join," I said, mostly just trying to justify why I was snooping around. I couldn't tell if she bought it or not. "I see. Are you familiar with our church at all?" "I mean, I've driven past a few times," I said. "Are you with a church?" "I suppose you could call me." "The local pastor," she said. "I took over from my father about 10 years ago, give or take." "Family business, huh?" I asked. Her smile seemed to widen a little. "I suppose so," she said. "Oh, but he'd probably hate what I've done with the place." He was a bit more of an evangelical. The type. There used to be a sign out front preaching the coming end of days. I don't really get into all of that. My ideas about religion are a little different than his. "Really?" I asked. "How so?" "Oh, he believed church was like a horsewhip. Believe or burn in hellfire." I am well. I see it more as a shepherd's crook, bringing the community together, guiding them in one direction towards the truth. "Sounds nice," I said. "I like to think so. I believe in the strength of community. Whether or not you believe in a higher truth, you can believe in that. You can put your faith in that. That's why we have bonfires." "So, it's more of a community gathering than a mass?" I asked. "Well, we do have more traditional masses, but many nights I'll have members of the community here, and we'll gather by the fire. It's a fairly informal event. You're welcome to join us if you'd like. You may even make a few new friends." She said. Now, I'd be lying if I said that the offer didn't sound a little tempting, but the unease in the back of my mind still lingered. Something about this woman. It felt off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the vacant smile or the strange tone of her voice. Maybe it was something else. Oh, we'll see," I said. "I work nights, but if I can make it out, I'd love to." "Well, I hope to see you there," Harmony said. "In the meantime, feel free to stop by if you ever need anything or have any questions. My door is always open." Yeah, for sure. "Maybe I'll take you up on that," I assured her. I should really get going, but I'll see you around." "Yes, see you around," she said calmly, and she watched me as I left. I could feel her eyes on me as I made my way back to the road, and when I looked back, she was still standing there by the ashes of the bonfire, just watching me. When I got back on shift that night, I had to ask Anderson about the Church of the Sacred Dove. I caught him in the station's gym about half an hour before patrol. He was on one of the treadmills, so I hopped up on the one beside him. He greeted me with a single nod. "Hey, how goes it, kid?" he asked. "I can't complain," I said. "Half flying. How are you doing?" "Oh, same old, same old. You know how it goes." I nodded, and we got into small talk for a bit, shooting the breeze while I worked up to my real question. "So what exactly is up with the church on Aspen Park Road? I've heard of some weird churches in my time, but they seem different." "Trust me, kid. The less you talk about them, the better," Anderson said. Yeah, you keep saying that, but I'd ask a lot less questions if I knew why we weren't supposed to talk about it." Anderson huffed at that before slowing down the pace of his treadmill. It's a long, ugly story, kiddo, he said. I'll admit, even I don't know all the details well. What do you know? I asked. All right, it used to be run by some old guy. Your typical hellfire and brimstone preacher. It was a lot less interesting back then. But after he passed away a few years back, his daughter took over. She's a lot more. What's the word for it? New Age, spirituality, occult stuff, animal sacrifices. Animal sacrifices, I repeated. Yeah, apparently they've got an understanding with the county. Look, our job isn't to get into it. Our job is to just keep the peace. Whatever they got going on out there, it's all above board with the county and the department. So it is best to just keep your distance from it. People get in trouble for poking around that stuff too much. I'd hate to see you ending up like them. Fair enough, I said softly. Anderson stopped his treadmill and he took a long swig from his water bottle. I'm hitting the showers. Look, I'm not trying to intimidate you, Joey. I'm really not. But it's better if you don't think about that, Church. Leave a note for Norris and you will be so much happier. Trust me. I think he was trying to be reassuring with those words, but if anything, it all just made me more queasy. While Anderson went off to the locker rooms, I left the treadmill and moved on to the exercise bike. I thought about the bone I'd found earlier. If they were using the bonfires for animal sacrifice, then the bone had probably come from that. But there was still uncertainty in the back of my mind. As I sat on the exercise bike, I knew it wouldn't go away. Until I found out for sure. My nights working with Anderson were quiet. We broke up a few loud parties, dealt with some domestic disturbances, and we picked up a couple of drunks down at the bar. That was really it. Nothing seemed to happen around the Aspen Park Road area. If anything, things were especially quiet out there. Well, for a few nights at least. It was about 3 days after I'd found the bone that I saw a man in a white robe running down the street. We'd been driving in his direction when I noticed them. It was impossible to miss him, even in the dark. Our headlights lit up those robes of his like a Christmas tree. We were only about a block from Aspen Park Road. I clearly remember that the time was just past midnight. Anderson, I said, pointing out the man as if he wasn't right in front of us. I saw him stare at the man on the street. I expected him to slow down, put on our lights, and check in on the guy. He didn't. He just watched him quietly and moved over a little bit to avoid hitting him. The man seemed to see us. The man stretched out his arms, running for the car, and I could see genuine terror on his face, a wild-eyed panic that was close to hysteria. Anderson still didn't stop. He just kept going. He drove past the man who was desperately chasing after us. What the hell are you doing? I asked. Rules are rules, Joey, he said plainly. We just keep moving. What the hell will we do? I snapped, trying to unlock the door so I could get out. We weren't going that fast. I could get out of the car without getting hurt. The moment I put my hand on the door, though, Anderson grabbed my wrist, breaking hard. Don't, he warned. His eyes burned into mine. They were more intense than I'd ever seen them. The man in the white robe had caught up with our car. I could hear him banging on my window. I could hear him screaming. Tears streamed down his face as he tried to pull my door open, but Anderson had locked it. We don't respond to the things we see out here, Joey, he said. We leave them be, and we leave a note for Officer Norris. I stared at him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Jesus, Anderson, there's a man pounding on our window, I said. We don't respond, he replied. I tried to open the door again, but he lunged for me, pinning me against my seat. This is for your own good, kid, he said. As I tried to fight him off outside of the car, the man in the white robe was watching us, his eyes wide with terror. I noticed 5 figures behind him. They emerged from the darkness on the edge of the street. All of them were dressed in black robes with hoods that hid their faces. The man in the white robe didn't seem to notice them just yet. He was still focused on Anderson and me fighting in the car. Anderson glanced over at the man. I know he saw the figures approaching him, but he didn't do anything. He just kept his weight on me, leaving me helpless to stop what was coming next. The The man in the white robe finally seemed to notice the newcomers behind him, and he was terrified. He started to run, but the dark-robed figures quickly closed the distance. I squirmed violently, trying to reach for the taser in my belt, and as soon as he realized what I was doing, he grabbed my wrist. "Don't," he said again. "Just let it go, Joey. Let it go." All I could do was watch the black-robed figures drag the screaming men away. He fought against them. He kicked. He cried, but he couldn't escape. They took him away, and there was nothing I could do to stop them. I pounded on Anderson's shoulders like a kid having a tantrum, but he didn't budge. He just kept me pinned to the seat. "The rules exist for a reason," he said. "I get it. All right, I get it. It's not in your nature to look the other way. I get it. But you don't get involved in the church's affairs. Do you understand that? That man was running," I tried to argue, "and we'll leave a note for Norris." "Who the hell even is Norris?" I snapped. "Who's Officer Norris?" Because you know what? In the past few weeks I've been here, I've never seen or heard anyone else mention anyone named Officer D. Norris. But he's the guy we send to deal with these calls. A guy who, as far as I can tell, doesn't even exist. That man was running scared. Anderson. We're supposed to do something about it. I tried to push Anderson off me, but he still wouldn't move. "Don't," he said. "Joey, don't go to hell." I snapped. I slammed my head against his and I knocked him back just a few inches. I threw the cruiser door open and I stumbled out. The man in the white robe couldn't have gotten far. I just needed to catch up. Suddenly, every muscle in my body clenched, as I experienced what I can only describe as the unholy combination of a full body cramp and getting hit by a baseball bat. I've been shot with a taser before, back during my training in Columbus. I'd always hoped I wouldn't have to experience that again, but I guess Anderson had other ideas. I crashed to the ground with a heavy thud, twitching as I did. Anderson stood over me, watching me writhe on the ground. "Don't be a hero, Joey," he said. "Heroes don't last long in this town, and the rest of us survive by following the rules. This is her town. It's been her town for the past 10 years, so please just stop." I rolled under my back, panting heavily. I saw Anderson staring down at me. I could see that he'd drawn his gun. He wasn't aiming it at me, but it was there, a silent warning against trying anything else. After a moment, he offered me a hand. "Stand up," he said calmly. "Let's call it a night, all right? Let's get a coffee and move on, okay? Let's put this behind us," despite the sincerity in his voice. I think he knew damn well that putting this behind us wasn't really an option. I could see it in his eyes, but behind his determination, I could also see hope. Hope that I'd see the light and just let it go. I let out a tired exhale before reaching for his hand and letting him pull me to my feet. "Atta boy," he said. "Now let's get you a coffee, all right? Come on." Into the cruiser. He gestured to the open passenger side door, and I shuffled in. My entire body still hurt, but there wasn't much else I could do. Anderson closed the door behind me, and then he went around the car to get in the driver's seat. His mistake was taking his eyes off me. I'm not proud of what I did next, but if we did things Anderson's way, we would have been abandoning the man who was begging for our help. Maybe he could do that, but I couldn't. I reached for my pepper spray as soon as he closed the door. When he got back into the car beside me, I emptied the entire can in his face. Anderson screamed, thrashing violently and collapsing back out of the car. I heard him scream my name, but I didn't waste any more time on him. I threw my door open, and I stumbled back out onto the street. "Joey, Joey." I heard Anderson yell, but I was already running. I was following the robed figures back toward Aspen Park Road and the church. It didn't take long before I heard the music. Loud drums and chaotic singing. I could see the light of a bonfire up ahead. It's in the same clearing I visited the other day, but this time I could see figures dancing in the firelight. The bonfire towered over the dancers. I paused before moving into the nearby woods. I used the trees and the darkness to hide me as I crept closer. I counted around 20 to 30 people around the fire. About 5 of them were dancing around it. They were all dressed in ceremonial robes that twirled and swished around them. leaving their legs and feet bare against the elements. Each of the dancers wore an elaborate bird skull mask. Their dance, it looked like nothing I'd ever seen before. Their arms swayed in rhythmic circular patterns. They barely even seemed to move like humans. At the entrance of the clearing stood a woman watching the dancers. She was wearing a familiar white dress. Like the dancers, she also wore a bird mask and stood barefoot in the snow. Harmony. It had to be her. Beside her, I could see two groups of black-robed figures. Each one of them was holding back a stranger dressed in white. One of them, it was the man I'd seen on the road. The other was someone new, a second man, who also looked scared out of his head. There was a part of me that wanted to rush into that clearing, draw my gun, and break up whatever this was. But something else kept me rooted to the spot. I watched as the dance reached its climax, until at last all of the dancers collapsed into the snow, bowing before the fire. Only then did Harmony speak. "We now offer our choice. At this hour of winter," she began, "we offer them to you, O greatness, ye of sickle claw and hungry beak, ye of endless eyes and grinding teeth. We offer you this feast, O holiest of holies." She raised her arms. As if on cue, the two captured strangers were dragged towards the fire. I could see them fighting. I could hear them screaming. The smell of burning flesh flashed in my memory, and I remembered the bone I'd found in the ashes of that very bonfire. In that moment, I knew that every fear that had lurked in my mind about this place was true. They were going to burn those people alive. Sacrificing them to do what? I went for my gun. The people in the clearing didn't seem armed. I could shut this down. I could end it. I needed to end it. I fired 3 shots into the air as I charged out of the trees, and Harmony calmly turned to look at me as I did. "Whatever the hell this is, ends now," I spat. "Let those people go." The figures in black didn't respond. They held their victims tightly as they struggled to break free. "Well, Joey wasn't," Harmony asked, her voice still calm. "Seems you've made it to one of our gatherings after all. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but I'm putting an end to it." I snapped. "Let those people go now." I aimed my gun at Harmony's chest, and she just laughed. "It's charming that you think you hold authority over me," she said. "But very well. I'll humor you." She clapped her hands twice. "Let them go." At her command, the 2 prisoners were released and took off on a run. "There. See, I'm capable of being reasonable," she said softly. "He, on the other hand, is not." "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked. "You really are clueless about what we're doing here, aren't you?" "I'm not surprised. You're with the local police, aren't you? I suppose they didn't really explain our arrangement with them." "Just because you've got them in your pocket doesn't mean you've got me too," I said. "In my pocket," she said. "You really are small-minded. I suppose you think that this is either madness or some sort of conspiracy, don't you? But it's all much more simple than that. Then enlighten me. This ground we stand on is consecrated. We stand in a temple, and we stand here in worship. Only our prayer is a little more direct than most." She looked at me before noticing my confusion. "Well, my father didn't understand it either," she said. "He believed what a god needed was loyalty, prayer, servitude. And yes, these things are necessary. But above all, a god wants food. He wants to be fed, and we feed him." "Lady, you are well and truly nuts," I said, keeping my gun trained on her. "Get on the ground, hands behind your head." "You're going to arrest me?" she asked. "You think he will allow you to place one hand on me?" "You know what? Let's find out," I said, keeping my gun on her as I approached. She didn't put up a fight. She only watched me, a look of amusement on her face as I came closer. I put a hand on her shoulder, trying to force her down to her knees. But as I did, the clearing grew brighter. A blinding flash rose from the flames. Not a flare from the fire, but something else. The bonfire seemed to grow. It seemed to change for a moment. I was sure that there was something in the fire, something watching me. I couldn't make out exactly what. I could make out shapes, wings, eyes. Too many eyes, sharp teeth, but not much else. My ears began to ring. The light around me was blinding. I couldn't look at it. I couldn't focus. I didn't remember falling into the snow, but I must have. Because next thing I knew, Harmony was standing over me. She was smiling through that bird mask of hers. "And so now you see," she said, before looking back towards the men in the black robes. "Cast this one into the fire, as he has freed our intended sacrifices. He shall take their place." I tried to stand, but I felt hands grabbing me, forcing me to my feet. The gun was torn out of my hand. I stared into the fire. Countless eyes stared back at me from the flames. "No, no," was the only word I could say. "Wait." A new voice echoed through the clearing. Harmony turned to look where it came from, and I saw Anderson standing at the edge of the tree line, holding up a hand. "Don't do this," Anderson panted. "Don't do this. He's cost us our sacrifices this evening, Anderson. Why should he be spared?" Harmony asked. "Please. It's my fault he got involved. I should have. I should have stopped him. I should have made him realize. Please, it's my fault. So we should take you instead." She hummed. "How noble. Give me one reason why I shouldn't sacrifice you both. He's seen what you do here. He knows what's in the fire." Anderson said, "He's more used to you alive now, just like I was. Just like Norris was." Harmony was silent for a moment. "Oh, and so we finally come full circle, don't we? Jeremiah Anderson." I saw Anderson hesitate for a moment, before giving a single nod. "Yes, yes, we have." Harmony seemed to think for a moment before giving a nod. "Very well, then. If you're so determined, then you will go to the fire." Anderson didn't say anything to that, but his eyes locked on mine. There was meaning in that last look he gave me. More meaning than simple words could convey. Scolding, fear, hope, and a plea. With that one last look between us, I understood Anderson better than I had in all the weeks we'd worked together. I didn't say anything to him. I didn't nod. I just stared back at him, grateful, terrified, unsure of what might happen next. "Thank you," Anderson said, and I'm not sure if he was talking to me or to Harmony. And then he turned and stared into the fire. Taking one final breath, I watched as he began to walk towards it. His footsteps faltered. There was fear in his every movement. But he didn't stop. He didn't hesitate. He offered himself to the fire, and as it consumed him, as the flames melted the flesh from his bones, filling my nostrils with the stench of burning meat, as his screams faded into the night, I watched. It was about a year later that they sent me a new recruit to work with on the night shift. Some kid from Toledo. Been a cop for 3 years. He figured that starting fresh in some rural small town might do him some good. As I met him for the first time in the break room before our first shift together, I sized him up. I lit myself a cigarette before starting. "I don't know what your shifts were like back in Toledo, but the night shifts here tend to get pretty weird," I said. He assured me he can handle it, and for some reason that made me laugh. "That's what they all say, kiddo. Look, there's Toledo weird, and then there's heaven weird. Believe me when I say they're two completely different animals. And it's best if you don't ask too many questions about it. Look, just follow the rules and you'll be okay. It's that simple." He just stared at me with a confused look. Nobody had told him about the rules. I sighed and shook my head. "Geez, they're really just hiring anybody these days, right? Well, I'll run through them with you. It's pretty simple stuff. The long and short of it is that the church is out on Aspen Park Road. Has a special sort of arrangement with the department, so there's a few unique rules in place with them. Rule number 1 is that anything out of place you might see around Aspen Park Road, area goes directly to Officer Jeremiah Anderson. And I do mean anything. I don't care what you think you see out there. We don't touch it. It goes to Officer Anderson, and only to Officer Anderson. You got that?" The trainee nodded. But I knew he didn't understand. He thought he did, just like I once thought I did. But he didn't understand. He couldn't. Not unless he saw it himself. I understood, though. Just like Anderson once understood, you can't fight a god. All you can do is play by its rules. From the earliest age that I can remember, becoming a park ranger was my life goal. My father and I spent every weekend hiking, fishing, and camping in Arlo Bennett National Forest. Not everyone is as lucky as we were to have access to 560,000 acres of pristine woodland, streams, and hiking trails. But with it being only a 20-minute drive away, we practically lived there from Friday to Sunday evening. While I could recount hundreds of stories of our exploits in the park, I think it would be best if I stick with the information pertinent to the dangers I want to warn you of. When I was about 10 years old, my father and I had just finished setting up camp for the night. The tent was placed, the latrine dug, and our campfire was burning warmly in front of us. After dinner, I walked to an area away from the campground, and then as I was heading back, I heard a soft whistling coming from the forest behind me. Looking over through the trees, I could see my father, pipe in mouth, sitting on the ground by our fire. Turning my head back to the direction of the whistling, I squinted my eyes and peered into the distance to try and identify the source of the whistling. It was likely a bird, I thought to myself, but there were hints of a subtle melody that kept me from being certain. The fading light of the sun didn't provide me with much of a view, so I continued listening to the soft whistling. Having decided it warranted no further investigation, I resolved to return myself to the safety of my father's company and the much-desired illumination of our campfire. I turned around and began to shuffle through the undergrowth of the forest, when over my shoulder I was certain I heard someone shout from a distance, "It's this way. Come and see." My fight, flight, or freeze response immediately chose the worst of all options as I stopped dead in my tracks. Turning around quickly, I looked in the distance and saw what I thought was the silhouette of a person waving far in the distance. They didn't call out again, but a single arm continued to wave above their head, before they eventually dropped it and stepped backward, disappearing behind a monstrously large oak tree. Without another thought, I bolted the short distance back to our campsite and in a panic, told my father what I thought I'd seen and heard. He smiled and reassured me it was likely nothing more than another camper, but he would investigate, shouldering the strap of his rifle and digging the flashlight out of his bag. We trekked into the woods in the direction I thought I'd seen the figure. My heart hammered against my chest as we slowly made gains in that direction. As we neared the mess of oak I'd seen from the latrine, my father began to sweep the ground with a beam of the flashlight, searching for signs of a disturbance. There was no sign of a recent activity. The dried leaves and fallen branches seemed to be completely undisturbed. We continued maybe a quarter of a mile beyond the oak, and still found no sign of another camp or any human activity at all. My father ruffled his hair with his hand, and assured me it was just my mind playing a trick on me. I really wanted to believe him, but something in my heart told me I had seen someone, or more unsettling yet, something. After getting back to our camp and settling beside the dwindling embers of our fire, my father did something he'd never done before. He began telling me a ghost story. In these woods, he started. People for over a century had told each other tales of wanderers in the woods. Beautiful melodies whistled through the trees. Strangers in the distance would wave and beckon travelers to come and see incredible things. Anyone foolish enough to follow them vanished, never to be seen again. Not understanding why he would tell me these things, I began to panic as my eyes searched the surrounding forest. Seeing my visible discomfort, he smiled and told me that as a boy, he thought he'd seen the same thing. My grandfather had told him the same story when he was my age, or perhaps a bit younger. Every time they would tread the same trails that he and I hike now, he always imagined hearing or seeing the wanderers in the woods. When he told my grandfather what he'd heard and seen, he took it as an opportunity to teach him that the whistling sound was a known call of a local bird. He would also find shapes in the distance and show him how inanimate objects at a distance could produce the illusion of a man or woman watching them. I began to calm down a bit. We were deep within a massive national forest, and the odds of encountering another person was slim at best. My youthful fears had gathered natural occurrences around me and organized them into an unnerving and unlikely scenario. I eased my posture substantially, and I smiled thankfully at my father. In all our trips together after that, I never had the same experience again. When I started working as a park ranger at Fire Tower 1, the experiences became so much worse than my younger self could have ever imagined. I just finished college with a degree in wildlife conservation a couple years back, but it was a hard time and difficult to find a job. Being hundreds of miles from home and the not-so-proud owner of a rapidly dwindling bank account, I spent hours each day filling out job applications, sending out resumes and cold calling every national park and forest I could find. Desperation was mounting daily until I'd finally resolved to pack up my belongings and move back to my hometown. My parents had passed away in a car accident during my sophomore year. I wouldn't be returning to a stable support system, but I was at least confident that old friends and extended family may be able to help me find gainful employment and find steady footing in my post-college life. Moving day arrived, and I finished boxing up the last of my possessions and stacking them haphazardly into the back of a rented box truck. After managing to get my beater of a car into the car-towed dolly on the back of the truck, I could feel my phone buzz in my pocket. Slumping down under the tailgate of the box truck, I fished it out and saw a red notification bubble on my mail application, and I clicked on it. The feeling of joy I experienced can't be accurately described as I read the attached email. From Arlo Bennett National Forest Hiring Authority. Your application has been chosen for Fire Tower 1 in Arlo Bennett National Forest. Congratulations and welcome to our team. We're excited to inform you that as a new park ranger for wildlife services, you will be stationed at Fire Tower 1. You are expected to arrive at Ranger Station 3 at or before 0800 hours EST. Uniforms, equipment, shelter, and necessities will be provided as this is a 24/7 live-in posting. If you require storage for personal items you do not wish to keep in your on-site residence, accommodations will be made upon arrival. Please bring a valid driver's license, social security card, and a copy of this email to be presented upon arrival. We thank you for your time and look forward to meeting you. Welcome to the team. Dennis Garland, Superintendent, Arlo Bennett National Forest. I read the email over and over, no less than 10 times. Only minutes ago, I was getting ready to drive a box truck home. And now I couldn't wait to travel down the road to my new career and what I thought would be a bright future. 2 days and one terrible roadside motel later, I pulled the box truck into a nearly empty parking lot in front of a log-sided building with a sign reading Ranger Station 3. 2 well-aged Jeeps sat parked side to side in front of the station, but marked clearly as Ranger patrol vehicles. I couldn't help but smile. Here I was, right where I'd always wanted to be. With a mixed sense of pride and terror, I made my way into the Ranger station and introduced myself to a man with salt and pepper hair. Sitting at the desk in the entryway, I introduced myself and was greeted with a vice grip of a handshake, and he identified himself as Superintendent Garland. He explained to me that while he was generally not stationed at this location, he made it a goal to personally meet every new hired ranger and walk them through the process. Over the course of the next few hours, we filled out a seemingly endless pile of paperwork, drank bad coffee out of chip mugs, and I listened intently as he explained my job duties at Fire Tower 1. None of the duties sounded unusual in any way. I would work in a 3x3 grid with fire towers 1 to 9. For the first 2 weeks of the month, I would man the tower from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. A reserve staff member would report to the station to give me a day off to readjust my sleep schedule for the last half of the month. The following 2 weeks, I would work from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. Each tower in the grid was staggered by shift to watch neighboring off-duty sectors around them, as well as their own. The primary concern was to watch for the inception of forest fires. Lightning strikes and unauthorized campfires were a constant concern in this area, so 24-hour surveillance was necessary. All fire tower rangers were provided with a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom cabin located at the base of the tower. The cabins were fully furnished, and basic supplies were provided for your first week on the job, with the expectation you will provide your own groceries and other provisions thereafter. Routine maintenance of the cabin and tower was to be performed by the occupying ranger. Mr. Garland also informed me that I would work 4 weeks on duty with 1 full week of duty. Reserve staff would report to the cabin at each tower to relieve the primary attendant to allow them some rest. The second bedroom was to be reserved for them, and we were to keep it free of personal items. One exemption to the rule was, in the event a camper or hiker was retrieved during a search and rescue operation, they would stay until they could be evacuated to the nearest town by medical staff. As we wrapped up, I was smiling ear to ear. Dream job, check. Rent-free living, check. After a worrying season in my life, everything seemed to be going my way. I was already making a mental checklist of what personal items to keep in the cabin and what I would need to store in the provided shed when Mr. Garland's gruff voice unexpectedly pulled me out of my daydream. One more thing, he said, eyes locking with mine. Don't travel any farther than a half mile or so north of Tower 1. Oh yeah, sure thing, I replied. No problem at all. But is there any particular reason? Mister. Garland stared at me in silence for a moment, and I could tell he was trying to sort out the answer. Dangerous woods that way, son, he finally replied. Bobcats and bears. Nasty business. I nodded politely, but it wasn't a terribly satisfying answer. My father and I had camped in this very forest for years and had always known predatory wildlife lived throughout the entirety of the reserve area. Unless the bobcats had learned to team up with the bears to hunt people down, it seemed unlikely to be any more dangerous than any other area. Regardless, I wasn't about to argue with my new employer. He shook my hand and gave me a few pointers as he walked me to the door. I picked up a duffel bag they prepared for me. Heading out to the truck, I tried to reignite my excitement and invigoration for my new job, but the warning he'd given me still circled in my mind. Don't go north of the tower. At that moment, I fully intended to adhere to this direction, but that would change. My first week at the cabin and tower was a whirlwind of information. Thomas, the ranger currently occupying my new tower, was a reserve ranger who filled in the off weeks of fire towers 1 to 3. As he helped me unload my box truck and unhook my car, I picked his brain for every piece of advice I could think to ask for. He'd worked for a ranger service here for almost a decade. I was surprised to learn that he had originally been offered the permanent role in Fire Tower 1, a significant pay increase from reserve status, but had declined, stating that he loved traveling to the different towers and the change of scenery. He seemed like a very genuine and helpful man, but at the back of my mind I couldn't help but wonder if whatever could be found north of the tower drove him to decline the position. So, do you ever do any hiking or camping when you're off duty? I asked on our last day together, as we sat in the lookout booth of the fire tower. Yeah, at least once a month or so, Thomas replied. I'd say I've probably hiked or explored everything within about 5 miles of the fire towers. This seemed like a good chance to ask Thomas about the area north of the tower. Yeah, I got a pretty good grasp of the territory to the east, south, and west, but is there anything worth checking out north of the tower? I looked intently in his direction, but he never returned my gaze. Thomas stood up quickly, began to pack his hiking bag without making eye contact. He tossed the filled bag over his shoulder and made his way to the door in the narrow walkway leading to the wraparound stairs. Once he made it out the door, he turned and looked at me with a determined face. North of the tower isn't safe, he said, and then turned and started down the stairs. Bobcats and bears that way. Stay clear. A few minutes later, I could hear the roar of an engine and the sound of gravel scattering beneath tires as his Jeep made its way down the deserted RD. I was surprised by his sudden departure and lack of formal farewell. It wasn't as if I wouldn't see him again, but for such a friendly guy, it seemed like a rude exit. A bit of clarity from Thomas had been what I was anticipating, but now I was just left with a lead weight in my stomach and a slight feeling of dread. The answer had been so quick, it almost seemed like he'd practiced it. Matched with a dash for the door, I was sure something worse than wildlife must be up there. That evening after my shift ended, I radioed the 2 towers in my grid to verify they were safely on shift. After receiving an affirmative message from both, I began to shut down all the tower equipment other than the radio and gather up my belongings. There was still a bit of daylight left, so I seized the opportunity to grab a few odds and ends from the storage shed to bring into the cabin. My personal quarters were mostly organized, but there was still a barren bookshelf in the corner that was begging for some more tattered paperbacks. I dumped the old cardboard box on the floor by the bookshelf and squatted down under the hardwood floor, sitting cross-legged. I opened the box and put some novels on the bookshelf. The bottom shelves were full, and I was just beginning to load up the top shelf. When I noticed something was sitting behind the bookshelf, I reached my hand into the corner, and I pulled out a worn leather book. There were no markings on the front or back of it. Thumbing it open to a page marked with an attached leather strip bookmark, I could see the winding loops of cursive handwriting. Not a book, so to speak, but a journal. It must have belonged to the ranger who manned the station before me. I considered reading it, but decided against it. Tossing it on the top of the bookshelf, I made a mental note to give it to Mr. Garland the next time I saw him so he could return it to the rightful owner. After stowing away my books, I took the cardboard box outside and started walking down the gravel path to the storage building. There was a steel cage to place garbage in. To try and keep larger wildlife from rifling through it, I reached down to my hip to retrieve my keys. Setting the box down, I slid the key into the lock and opened the gate to toss it in. But just as I reached down to retrieve the box, I heard something off in the distance. By now, the light of day was a distant memory, and my eyes had not yet adjusted to the darkness. Years of living in the city had made me forget just how dark the forest could be. I'd still gone on the occasional hike or camping trip with classmates, but I'd usually been to a paid-aside campsite and passed it with soft wattage bulbs. It hadn't occurred to me to switch on the light that extended to the storage shed. My visibility was aided only by the light bulb on the cabin's front porch, which was being swallowed up by the darkness. And that's when I heard the whistling. It was soft and indistinct, but I could hear it. The crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs in the distance, accompanied by that tune. I was unable to move as I attempted to locate the direction it was coming from, but I couldn't. While the sound seemed to be coming from one point far off in the distance, I could also hear traces of it all around me. Before Thomas left, we'd gone over the camping permit logs for our grid, and there were none requested within 10 miles of my post. All of the most popular hiking trails were equally far away, so there was little to no reason for anyone to be traveling in this area at this time of night. The only trails around here were less traveled and given to more experienced hikers. Any hiker with the skill to travel these trails would also have the common sense to have set up camp for the night. As I stood there listening and squinting in the darkness, I couldn't help but feel like the 10-year-old boy from so many years ago. But this time I didn't have my father to comfort me the night around the fire. He was able to explain all of this in a way that made me believe my imagination had just run away with me. Standing here by myself, I didn't feel like that anymore. The whistling was becoming louder. Where before it was disembodied in a distant sound, I could tell that the source was now moving in my direction. There was a haunting, yet beautiful melody. I was able to hear it more clearly. I could also hear the more defined noise of crunching leaves. It was almost hypnotizing. My eyes began to close and relaxation began to settle into my bones, where icy fear had been only moments earlier. I felt like it may be a good idea to just walk towards the source of the beautiful melody. "It's this way," I heard a soft voice say. "Come and see." The feeling of relaxation drained out of me almost as quickly as it had begun, when a melodic whistling had lulled me into a stupor. The sudden call from the darkness sobered me to the situation. I stumbled backward toward the cabin and began to run towards the safety of the burning bulb. The sound of my heavy footfalls as I ran ensured that any whistling or footsteps would be impossible to hear. All the while, though, I could imagine someone or something mere steps behind me, a clawed hand outstretched toward my back and still beckoning me to come and see what was in the darkness. Once I reached the front door, I pushed my way inside, slammed the door, engaged the deadbolt, and slid onto the floor. My back against the door, I simply sat there, panting and trying to listen for any signs of activity outside. There was no whistling, no footsteps on the walkway or the porch, no knocking. It was just the noise of my gulping breath and the thunder of my heart against my rib cage. After a few minutes, I was finally able to collect myself enough to put a plan together. If there was someone out there, maybe they were in danger. If they weren't, well, they shouldn't be wandering around in the middle of the night. I went to the control room in the cabin and threw on the breakers to the floodlights located around the perimeter. Before leaving the control room, I grabbed a floodlight and grabbed a hunting rifle off the rack. Uneasily and slowly, I disengaged the deadbolt to the front door and stepped outside. The forest was now a combination of artificial light and long shadows. I made my way back down the gravel trail towards the storage building. The whistling had begun just beyond the storage shed. I began to sweep the tree line. Nothing. Not a single damn thing. For all the crunching leaves and breaking branches I thought I'd heard, there was no sign of anything. I continued sweeping the distance with the floor light. When I heard the ping of an incoming call on the fire tower watch radio, the sound made me jump, and I was relieved to realize it was an incoming radio signal. Already out of breath from running from the storage building, the ascent to the top of the tower was slow. I finally reached the lookout box and turned on the light. "Tower 1, this is Tower 5, you copy?" I punched the button on the radio mic. "I read you, Tower 5. Go for Tower 1. Tower 1, status check," the voice said. I can see your floodlights over here at Tower 5. Is everything all right? I immediately felt embarrassed, and I didn't want to explain this to my coworker who I hadn't even met yet. Yeah, everything's all clear. I just, Thomas explained to me how to use the flood system, and I wanted to give it a hands-on run. I'll cut them now. Everything's 10 to 4. Tower 5 radioed back that they understood and wished me luck. I thanked the ranger and headed back down to the cabin to the control room to cut the flood system off. Reaching for the controls, I hesitated. As scared and tired as I was, I knew I had to take one last look outside before I shut them off. Pulling the cord on the blinds, I opened them to look outside, and in the distance, at the edge of the floodlights, I thought I could see something roughly the size of a human walking into the darkness past the tree line. My heart began to hammer all over again. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and tried to snap a picture before it disappeared, but it was gone before I managed to. Before I returned my phone to my pocket, a curious thought occurred to me. Thumbing through my applications, I found the one I was looking for. A digital compass popped up on my screen, and the needle bounced side to side as my hand shook. Once I was able to settle my nerves, the needle finally came to rest. It pointed north. To say I was on edge for the next few days would have been an understatement. The remainder of the week was my last week on the day shift before I transitioned to my 2-week rotation of evening watch. While I hadn't seen anything alarming since the night Thomas had departed, I had also taken special care to avoid the opportunity. No more nighttime travel to the storage shed. No taking the trash out in the evening. If I needed to complete any outdoor task, I made sure to do it during daylight. I'd mostly convinced myself that it was all in my imagination, but the thoughts still rolled around in the back of my head that maybe I saw and heard exactly what I thought I had immediately after my shift each day. I shut down all lookout equipment except the radio and headed directly down to the cabin. My evenings consisted of a steady schedule of TV show binging, dinner, a shower, and reading in bed. The small supply of books I'd brought didn't provide as much entertainment as I'd hoped. Most of them I'd read dozens of times already, and I quickly thumbed through the few that hadn't lost all their appeal. And then as I was reading, something caught my eye: the journal. Shuffling out of bed into the bookshelf, I scooped it up and returned to bed. Initially, I told myself it was immoral to read someone's private journal, but the odd feeling this place gave me and the lack of other engaging activities made it easier than it should have been to justify reading just a few pages. Settling back in under the blankets, I flipped open the cover to the first page and ran my hand over the cursive writing. The beginning introduced me to its writer, Gary Vincent, and his arrival to this cabin. Entry 1 was dated roughly 2 years before I arrived, and it told the uneventful story of his early life, education, and acceptance of the ranger position at Fire Tower 1. Our stories were fairly similar in many respects, but Gary, he seemed to have skipped the period of frantic job searching and desperation before his employment here. While not the most energetic or entertaining read I'd ever come across, there was something enjoyable about learning the personal thoughts of someone who I assumed was my predecessor. Thomas had trained him as well, and the two of them seemed to have developed a good friendship. The two of them camped and hiked the area together, and enjoyed their shared time at the cabin when Thomas came to relieve Gary for his R&R days. I was beginning to nod in and out of alertness when I'd finished about a third of the journal, when an entry jolted me back to attention. It read, "So there seems to be something strange going on around here. I love everything about living and working here in the forest, but now and again I just get a feeling that something's watching me. Can't quite put my finger on it. It's the same feeling you get when someone stands behind you in a room but doesn't say anything. Just an electric charge sensation. Last night, I was hauling the kitchen trash out to the old dumpster dungeon when I heard someone whistling out in the woods. I always check the camping permits at the start and end of my shift, so if there was an emergency, I can get help out to him. The thing is, there are no permits out this far that we had on record today. I tried calling out to the person whistling, but they would just fall silent whenever I did. A few minutes later, the little tune would pick back up. I tried calling out again, but it was just the same. No more whistling for a minute. There was a time or two I thought someone was telling me to come and look at something, but I'm not sure. I headed into the control room, grabbed the flashlight, and searched the area. But after a while of stumbling around in the woods, I called it quits. Didn't see anyone or hear any more whistling. I haven't really been out here all that long, but maybe the lack of daily interaction with people is just making my mind kind of funny. I don't know. I'm not too worried about it. If whistling is the worst thing I hear, well, I think I'm in pretty good shape. I read the passage over and over again. Almost the same thing had happened to Gary. The only noticeable difference between the two events was my total panic compared to Gary's cool and collected approach to investigating the area. A second difference dawned on me. Gary hadn't seen anyone in the woodline. I wasn't positive that I saw a person, but I was certain I'd seen something. Too engaged with the similarities of the journal, I knew I'd be up the rest of the night until I finished it. I got out of bed again, headed to the kitchen, and made myself a pot of coffee. I started reading again. There were no strange entries in the journal until about 3 months later. This is the entry. This place is starting to mess with my mind. I was outside last night doing my usual dumpster run when I started hearing that damn whistling again. Honestly, I'd forgotten about the last time it happened until 10 or so last night. I could hear the whistling louder this time, and something about it just made me happy. I just felt like I could wander in that direction and listen to it a little closer if I could find who was making that beautiful tune. It kind of made me sad, though. I'm not sure why. I clicked on the flashlight. I started walking north into the woods to see if I could find who it was. I called out and I asked if anyone was there, and the whistling started again. This time someone shouted back, "It's this way, come and see." I asked them what it was, but no one answered. When I started walking towards the sound of the voice, I could hear footsteps walking away from me, so I called out again for them to wait so I could talk to them. They just repeated the same thing. "It's this way, come and see." By now I figured there must be something to check out, so I kept walking after him. Maybe someone was hurt. The sound of that whistling made traveling a little bit easier. I felt kind of happy, like something good was about to happen. The woods were starting to get thicker by now, and I wasn't gaining on him. They always seemed to stay just ahead of me, occasionally. I would catch a glimpse of someone in my flashlight beam, and I'd call out, but still the same old thing. "It's this way. Come and see." Eventually, I came to a cluster of oak trees that were so tightly packed together, it looked like one monstrous tree. When I got to it, the whistling stopped for a little while, and suddenly I felt sad and alone. My eyes teared up, and I wasn't sure why. And then that tune came back. It sounded like it was up in the top of the trees. I tried shouting for them again a few times, but no one answered at first. After a few minutes of trying to get their attention, I finally heard someone reply, "It's up here, come see." "Up where?" I asked the voice. "In the trees," they said. "Use the stairs." The voice called back. I ran the flashlight around the base of the trees, and in the center of them, I could see what looked like a step. Inching closer and leaning between two of the oaks, I could see a damn spiral staircase running up the center of the trees and into the foliage. For a moment, it felt like the right thing to do. Just grab onto the banister and climb my way to the top. My foot was just settling under the bottom step when a sudden beeping and vibration startled me back to my senses. My smartwatch was beeping loudly, and when I looked down at my heart rate, it was nearly 150. I saw the time, too. It had only been 10 o'clock when I headed out, but it was almost 11:30 now. It seemed like I'd only been in the woods for maybe 15 minutes, but it had been an hour and a half. I panicked, and I ran back to the cabin. As I made my way back, there was the remnant of an old hiking trail that took me within a stone's throw of the cabin. It took me almost 2 hours to get back. My body aches, and I feel like I have the flu. I'm not sure what the hell was out there, but I'm going to have to call this in. My heart raced as I continued to read the journal. On the next few pages, Gary recounted how he'd called in the staircase to Superintendent Garland the next day, and that a team of rangers had met him at the cabin. They traveled back to the location where Gary had seen the stairs, but nothing was there. Gary begged them to come back at night, because that's when it'd be visible. The other rangers agreed to this to help calm Gary's concerns, but when they arrived there later that evening, there was still no staircase. The journal entries from this point on became almost incoherent. Gary was fixated on how the stairs had disappeared and why nobody else could find them. He admitted to traveling back multiple times, but never seeing them again. The absence of the whistling also seemed to bother him rather than soothe his concerns. He wrote endlessly about how he missed the beautiful melody, and that it maddened him that he couldn't remember all the notes. And then there was no entry for a long period. When Gary wrote what would be his final entry in the journal, he seemed to be a man who had lost his grip on reality. It read, "The music didn't return to me. The gentle melody haunted my mind, even though I couldn't quite remember how it sounded. So I traveled back again, down the forgotten path. I traveled north, traveled to those unusual trees. And there it was. The stairs were there. Thank God they were there. No one was whistling, and no voice invited me up, but I knew I needed to go. I belonged there, with him. He was waiting for me. The banister felt so good under my hand as I made my way up into my new home. Everyone's in unison there. The many are one. I just came back here to say goodbye to someone. Was there someone here I knew? I guess I'll just say goodbye to you, journal, because I'm going back. And this time I will stay. Maybe I can help others find their way. So many souls can be won if they can let themselves go. To anyone who reads these words, I tell you it's all true. And it's this way. Come and see." The journal ended. Nothing but blank pages followed this final entry. I was shaking as I closed the leather cover and stared into my empty coffee cup. The sun was coming up now. I clutched the journal in my hand, as though it were some sort of talisman. I didn't exactly know what to do, but for now, I had to get to my post. Months passed since I discovered the journal, and with time came the spring. Every once in a while, I'd hear the whistling in the woods on evenings when I didn't have to work in the tower. I think it was too hard to hear from up there, but I always assumed it was there. In the evenings after my shift, I'd taken to wearing earplugs. It seemed to keep me from feeling that unreasonable sensation to follow the sound. I'd share the journal with the others. Mr. Garland explained that Gary Vincent had been a stellar employee for the department for about 2 years, but confided in me that he had a history of mental illness. While they explained his complicated situation, Thomas handed me a photo of Gary. He was a few years older than me, with bright red hair and a huge smile. They told me that Gary suffered from schizophrenia, and that was controlled with his medications. Once Gary went missing, Thomas said he discovered that Gary hadn't been taking his pills. He'd taken to traveling into the northern forest more frequently in the last few months. He remained at his post. Thomas, Garland, and a host of other rangers had traveled to the location of the stairs with Gary, but there was never anything there. Each unsuccessful search seemed to cause him to become a little more distant with them, until eventually they all quit talking unless it had to do with work. The two of them implored Gary to seek help, but he never did, and then he just vanished. The subsequent search for him only turned up his tattered uniform jacket and his wallet. For my part, I continued doing my job. I liked the night shift the best because there was no whistling. Staring out into the darkness for hours, looking for potential fires, was soothing. My phone ran a constant stream of music to keep me company. When I worked the day shift, I'd bring Gary's journal with me, and I'd study it as though perhaps I'd discover some secret to his madness, but I never did. It just seemed to provide a kind of madness of my own. I became obsessed with finding out what happened to him. I can't honestly tell you why I decided to do what I did next, but the mystery had become more than I could take. Thomas arrived to start my week of RNR, and I told him I planned to do some camping and he'd add the cabin to himself for a few days. The day earlier, I'd already loaded the ATV and the storage shed with camping gear and extra gas. I was going to find the staircase, and as soon as Thomas started his shift, I fired up the ATV and headed on the trail to the east of the tower, so he'd be less likely to surmise my plans. I drove the ATV in a wide arc around the Tower 1 sector until I was about a quarter mile due north of the tower. It took me a while, but eventually I found the rutted trail that Gary had written about in his journal. The trip was uneventful, but with the use of the ATV, I finally reached the trees he'd mentioned. I slid off the ATV and approached the cluster of trees with caution. They formed a circle with a 3-foot gap facing towards the south. The canopy shadowed the inside, which made it hard to see. With a lump in my throat, I pulled the floodlight off the ATV and I looked into the circle of trees. Nothing. My pulse relaxed and my body tension eased. The staircase wasn't here. I felt a mixture of joy and sadness. Gary had seemed so sure of what he'd seen, and now I felt sure he'd been suffering from some sort of mental illness. Walking inside the circle of trees, I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. Feeling content that the staircase was a fantasy, I decided to make the most of my days off and follow through with a camping trip. The day was warmer than the seasonal average, so I chose to forego the tent and camp under the stars. I set up a nice fire. Even with the unusually warm day, I still gathered firewood just in case it got colder that night. After a quick meal and a few chapters in one of my paperbacks, I decided on it. It was time to turn in. I settled into my sleeping bag and enjoyed the heat from the fire. Sleep came quickly due to the exhaustion from my recent sleepless night and the revelation that Gary's staircase to nowhere had never been real. Sometime during the night, I woke to a familiar sound. The melody I'd avoided for so many months now was filling my ears, and it was coming from directly behind me. I rolled over and looked into the trees, and standing between the oaks was Gary. I recognized his wide smile and fiery red hair from the photo. His hair was sprouting in crazy directions, and his tattered ranger's uniform hung off his emaciated frame. But it was Gary. Gary just continued to smile as he stepped backward into the darkness. I could hear what I swore were the thuds of hiking boots on wooden boards. "It's up here. Come see," Gary said. I turned on the floodlight and aimed it into the trees, expecting to see him hunkered inside. But to my shock, the beam of the light gleamed off a polished mahogany banister. There was a beautifully crafted circular staircase in the center of the trees. Lifting my light, I caught the bottom of Gary's boot as he ascended the trees. Shouting his name, I sprinted inside. I wanted to help him. I could only hear the thud of his footfalls as he continued up the stairs. My pulse was racing, and I clung tightly to the banister. Leaves and branches traced the side of my face as we both climbed higher into the trees. The beam of my floodlight bounced and weaved between smooth mahogany wood and dense foliage. As fast as I climbed those stairs, I could hear Gary getting farther and farther ahead of me. My pace was beginning to slow, but I still clung to the banister and used it to pull myself up as I tried my best to reach this man racing ahead of me. The smoothness of the banister began to change under my hand as I climbed higher. What had been an unblemished surface had started to feel bumpy and rigid on my palm. I was starting to breathe heavily, and I knew I'd have to stop soon to catch my breath. I pointed my light down towards the stairs, but they looked different now. Where they'd been a rich brown at the bottom, they now appeared the color of half-burnt charcoal. I traced the light up higher to get a better view of my surroundings, and discovered why the banister felt so different. The smooth wood had changed into what I can only describe as an unending spinal cord, the bones curled upwards by the charcoal-colored steps. The foliage around me, which had been budding and green when I started my ascent, was now the sickly purple of a healing black eye with throbbing veins running through it. Black dew dotted the tops of the leaves, and I noticed that anywhere this dew made contact with my clothes, they were now developing small holes and the smell of decay. The branches of the trees made sudden pattern changes from obsidian to ashen white. Terrified, I turned to go back down the stairs. When I saw the section of steps below me crumble and fall away into nothingness, there was no way I'd climbed more than the equivalent of 6 flights of stairs, but I watched as chunks of burnt stairs and spinal cord banisters drifted off in a hellish purple chasm. As I tried to gain my composure and figure out what to do, I could feel the step below me beginning to crack and sink. Without another thought, I began to run up the stairs as quickly as I could, but all the while I could hear the steps behind me crumble. There would be no more breaks to catch my breath. I couldn't even afford to glance backwards. The air seemed to get thinner, and it had the ting of rotting meat. I could feel my legs buckling and struggling to keep up with the stairs, and I knew I'd soon fall back into that hell's cape below. Just as I felt the last of my strength give way, my hand reached for another section of the spinal cord banister and found nothing. I fell forward, and I hit level ground. My floodlight was flickering, but I could see the ground was made of something gray and writhing. It was damp to the touch, and I could feel it pulse beneath my palms. I jumped up in panic to get my hands off, and then my eyes met the horizon. The sky was a flowing purple and filled with thick fog. There was no variation to this gray terrain I was standing on. Endless plains in all directions were all I could see. Dotted over the entire landscape were what I thought were leafless trees. As my eyes focused on the unearthly light, I could see that they were instead people with their arms raised, reaching toward the sky. I could see some of their feet were held in place by skeletal hands emerging from the ground, while others seemed to be growing into a gray mass like a plant. Their eyes glowed softly, with the same purple light as the sky. A few yards in front of me stood Gary. The same purple glow flowed from his eyes, but he stood with his arms to his side. He motioned with both hands to a spot just beside him, and he smiled at me. On the ground where he pointed were two writhing skeletal hands, and I knew he wanted me to take my place there and become a part of this twisted place. Only, I was starting to feel like perhaps it wasn't as twisted as it first seemed. The melody I'd heard so many times in the woods echoed everywhere now. The forest of skyward-reaching people produced an overpowering wave of sound as they all whistled that same beautiful melody. Slowly, I started moving toward Gary, and thought that maybe this all made sense. Everyone here was happy after all. The purple of this world was beginning to look beautiful to me. I was about halfway to Gary when I halted for a moment and looked over my shoulder. There was an opening on the ground where the stairs had been. My head darted from side to side, and I could see more of these openings. There must be hundreds of these staircases leading up to this world, I realized. Looking back at Gary, I could see that same smile as before, but there was a nervousness to it. It was almost like he was pleading with me to step beside him and accept those skeletal hands as they wrapped around my ankles. When I noticed the tears running down his face and the ever so subtle shaking of his head, I realized he was trying to tell me no. Before I could ask him what was going on, I was startled by the deafening sound of a foghorn. The ground beneath me shook, and the beautiful melody suddenly turned into a blood-curdling shriek. Their hands dropped from the sky and covered their ears, and I did the same. A second boom of the foghorn came, and they lifted their heads and opened their mouths. Thin streams of blue and yellow smoke drifted out of them and into the distance. The smoke merged, and as I looked through the fog, I could for the first time see the outline of the thing. There was a colossal silhouette in the fog. It towered above the field, higher than anything I'd ever seen. It seemed to sprout out of the ground. I could see its long, bony arms and claws scooping up people. It had two curling horns protruding from its oval-shaped head. A cavernous mouth full of slender, sharp teeth opened. It shoved handfuls of screaming people into its mouth, and it seemed at the same time to breathe in the blue and yellow smoke. The appearance of this eldritch horror was more than I could bear. I pushed myself back toward the hole, and I looked back towards Gary. He was still crying, but he was nodding in agreement now as I got closer. I could see now that he was held in place by those same writhing skeletal hands. I broke my gaze with Gary, and I looked into the sky at the impossibly large abomination towering over the forest, and I saw its massive hand reaching through the fog towards me. Without another thought, I pushed myself back into the hole, and I closed my eyes. At this point, floating in an endless void was better than allowing that ageless horror to consume me or add me to its garden of souls. The sensation of falling was terrifying, and my stomach began to ball up tightly. I could feel myself moving faster and faster as the sickening purple void swirled around me. I closed my eyes and prayed that I would just die, and that's when I felt a sharp pain in my back as something scraped against me. I opened my eyes, but it was almost completely dark now. My descent began to slow, and I could feel things brushing against my face. My eyes began to focus on a growing light, and I could see that I was slamming into tree branches. Extending my arms, I was able to briefly grasp onto them and slow my fall. After what felt like hours of falling, I eventually landed with a thud onto the ground, and everything went black. When I came to and opened my eyes, I was in front of an abnormal circle of trees lying in the dirt. I could see the smooth mahogany stairs only feet in front of me. My entire body ached as I pushed myself up and staggered to the ATV to retrieve the gas can. Fuel spilled out of the upturn as I dumped the contents at the foot of those hellish stairs. I pulled a book of matches from my pocket. Then I flicked it into the trees. A rush of warmth hit me as the fire engulfed the stairs. I must have blacked out then, because the next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. Thomas was asleep in an armchair beside me. My left arm and left leg were in a cast. Reaching up to scratch my head, I could feel missing patches of hair. My entire body seemed to be covered in bruises and cuts. Thomas told me they'd found me after he spotted rising smoke from the lookout in Fire Tower 1. When the rangers and forestry services arrived, they found me at the foot of the blazing trees. I've been in the hospital now for 3 days and had been in and out of consciousness. He asked me repeatedly what had happened, but for now I just lied to him and told him I wasn't sure. Mister, Garland stopped by as well, and I just told him I'd gone camping and woke up in the hospital. I wasn't fired from my job, but I never returned. The Ranger Service investigated the fire, and while they were able to ascertain that it had been intentionally set, I wasn't suspected due to my battered state when they discovered me. The last time I spoke with Thomas, he told me he'd accepted the full-time position at Fire Tower 1, and I wished him luck. As for me, I've taken a traveling position with the Forestry Service. I travel the country now, performing studies of the forest under our care. It's been nice to see the country, and I still spend every available moment I have hiking and camping. My motivation is a bit different now. Every time I travel to a new town, I always ask the people there if there are any local legends about whistling in the woods. And I'm always looking for staircases and places they shouldn't be. I'll never forget what I saw in that purple hellscape. What haunts me the most is remembering those hundreds of holes that I knew must lead to hundreds of different staircases. I always listen now to whistling in the woods, and I always carry an extra can of gas. I'm a peeping Tom. I've been peeping for years. I'm sure I'm not someone you want to hear from, but I don't have anyone else to talk to. If I can just get this off my chest, that'll be good enough for me. I'm not sure how much worse this is going to get. I'll start from the beginning so I can try to answer as many questions as possible before it's too late. I don't think I have much time left. I love to watch. I haven't always been this way. It's something that just sort of happened. It started innocently enough, I guess as innocent as peeping can be. It was curiosity at first, and other people's inability to close their blinds. I've never hurt anybody. I've never stalked someone in the street, and I don't really use social media. Everything I've done has been done discreetly from the window of my home. I don't take pictures or record. I'm just there in the moment, watching other people's moments. I live in a nice condo on the second floor. My building runs parallel to the one across from me, with a little sidewalk courtyard deal filling the space between. It's a nice community, and I've lived there for a couple years now. I work remotely, freelance graphic design. I make pretty good money, and it all gets done on my desktop PC. I don't really have friends, mostly just clients and colleagues from work. They mainly reach out when they need my opinion on a piece or want to do a collaboration, which is fine by me, because I don't really like to go out. Almost everything I need can be bought online and delivered to my door. Before this started, I was totally content with my boring introverted life. I never bothered anyone, and nobody bothered me. Plain and simple. That was until the Jeffersons moved across the courtyard. Their name isn't really the Jeffersons, obviously. That's what I'll call them for simplicity's sake. The Jeffersons were your average young American family, hardworking husband and wife with a little girl. I'll call them Harry and Rebecca and the little girl, Julie. When they moved in, I watched them from behind the blinds like your stereotypical nosy neighbor, just trying to see who exactly would be joining the community. Everyone does it. Before this, the only thing I would gaze at out the window was a stray cat that would linger around. A little calico that had been there since before I started living there. I started calling him Cooper. I would have taken him in if I wasn't allergic. At first, that's all it was. My time watching the Jeffersons changed slowly over time. I wasn't just waiting there with my coffee creeping from day one after they moved in. I would see them in passing, out the window, of course, because I never really left my home to begin with. The sliding door to their balcony was my dominant view most of the time, as they mostly kept their blinds open to let the natural sunlight in. This would let me see their whole living room. I was very discreet when I watched, and I always watched the same way, on the right side of the window, and a crack at the very end of the blinds. I always kept my blinds closed, mostly to keep the light out. Once I started watching them more frequently, I decided it would indeed be problematic if I was caught, hence the discretion. Harry was tall and handsome, dirty, blonde, and fairly muscular. He worked construction or something like it. A regular 9 to 5 kind of guy. His routine was mostly the same. Go to work, come home and shower, help his wife with dinner and dishes, then spend time with the family until it is time for bed. Rebecca worked from home. Some kind of online perfume trade, I think. She was a natural blonde like her husband and very fit. This, I imagine, came from the several at-home workout regimens she followed. I didn't watch for perversion. I watched because of admiration. I imagine I wasn't the only one watching her occasionally, but still probably the one watching the most. Julie would spend her days playing with toys and watching cartoons. It was amusing to see her on adventures, running around with her imagination going wild. Sometimes when they came home from running errands in town, Julie would see Cooper trotting from the bushes, meowing as he went. She'd stop and scratch him behind the ears before her parents called her into the house. Part of me wished they'd just adopt him. The three of them settled in nicely, like a little puzzle piece that was missing in the community. Over time, I grew fond of this family, and what started as a glance or two turned into checking daily, outside my private routine of online design and clients. The Jeffersons provided a great distraction from the monotony. They seemed so alive to me. I was captivated by their existence. Very real people in their day-to-day lives, something Hollywood tries so hard to replicate. There's no acting here, no script. Weeks of watching turned to months. I got to know them quite well. In time, I would start to see patterns in the dinners they would make and the TV shows they would watch. I would notice when one of them had a particularly bad day, and eventually I would be able to see an argument coming. But the Jeffersons were a pretty happy family from the outside view, and by the time I realized I was perhaps watching too much, I found myself unable to stop. Over time, I watched them more and more. I tried to blaze through my work every day so I could get as much viewing time as I could. I'd always break it up in segments. I wouldn't stand there all day. I would at least pretend I had an interest of my own. I tried to get some other hobbies, such as video games, writing. I tried to binge TV series online so I could get invested in another story. But I always found my way back to my bedroom window, peeking through the blinds. After all, I was already pulled into a story, and this one never ran out of content. I watched it all the time. I monitored Rebecca and her online perfume sales, and when she seemed to do better, I found myself sharing her excitement. To my surprise, she started crocheting as well, and I got to watch her go from an amateur to building impressive skills. When Julie would play around the house, I would sometimes play along and try to imagine what kind of story was unfolding. She started to draw colorful pictures with crayons and markers. I bought a little monocular online so I'd be able to see the ones her parents put on the fridge. Harry picked up new hobbies as well. He started buying and indulging in more craft beers. At one point, he picked up wood carving. I'd chuckle at his crude, starting sculptures, and I'd wince and get saddened when he slipped and cut himself. When Julie got a little older, Harry and Rebecca started to have play-date nights, and Julie would stay the night with family. They would get all done up and go out all excited, then come home a little drunk and smiling. They'd then pop bottles of wine or have one last beer, laughing and caressing as they made their way to the couch. About 2 years went by as I enjoyed our little relationship. I was their little secret admirer. I know this sounds disturbing, and I do feel some guilt for seeing as much as I have. They never saw me, and I never tried to contact them. I never sent them gifts. I never tried to break the ice. Even though I knew enough about them, it would probably be easy to befriend them. I just wanted to continue my little watch from the bedroom window. This changed, however, the day I saw the moving truck parked in the lot. I grieved the department of the Jeffersons like the loss of a loved one. They packed quickly, and before I had time to come to terms with them leaving, they were gone, as if they were never there. All I had were the memories of the Jeffersons, and it pained me deeply when I looked through the slider, and their presence was gone, the walls bare. As a maintenance crew came in and painted and cleaned the carpets, wiping their imprint from the place, I found myself drinking, lost in a slump in the shadows of my own home. They were gone. Therefore, my only hobby was gone, and I realized how truly alone I was. Things were dark for a time, and for a few weeks the condo across the courtyard was empty. When I wasn't slugging through work, I was laying in bed, wasting the days away without drive or energy. I felt like a piece was missing, and I couldn't figure out how to fill the void. One day, another moving truck showed up, accompanied by what looked like a very expensive moving crew. For the first time in a while, I was back at the corner of my window, and I wondered if another tenant was moving out. The man in matching uniforms began unloading lots of exquisite furniture, much unlike what you would normally see around here. They carried it methodically to the empty condo, where the Jeffersons lived, and positioned the furnishings accordingly. Even brought in decorators to make sure everything was positioned just right. It was a professional moving job, and as I looked from my window, I wondered if maybe a movie star had rented the place out. They unloaded and set up in a matter of hours. Once the dishes were placed in the cabinets and the last painting was hung, they slammed the shutter on the loading truck and sped off into the night. It was very strange. I looked into the newly furnished dark condo with my monocular, trying to check out the stuff they had set up. I'd never seen anything quite like it. Grand leather couch and armchairs, ancient grandfather clock, paintings that must have been worth thousands. All set up and perfectly level, truly immaculate. I was so focused, looking over the possessions with my little monocular. I jumped when someone turned the lights on. I pulled the monocular down and looked to see someone standing in the condo, almost like a statue. A young man stood by the light switch, looking around the room slowly at all of his possessions, with the slightest grimace of disgust. He was wearing all black, his skin pale, his eyes sunken. He moped around the condo, painfully slow, head cocked, looking at each furnishing one at a time, his face mostly void of emotion. He tucked his hands in his pockets and did this through every room. I watched with great interest, almost stunned to see a tenant so suddenly. I couldn't deny the excitement I felt, but something was off about the guy, something that made me uncomfortable. I couldn't explain it. The incredibly odd fellow took 20 minutes to finish his rounds, and I watched in awe throughout the whole ordeal. When he finished, he stood in the living room once more, a quivering lip drooping into a frown. He was awkward and strange, but I still stood there staring. I felt so starved since the Jeffersons had left. I felt like I couldn't help myself in silence. I watched him from across the courtyard. With what looked like shaking hands, he got his phone out of his pocket and dialed, holding the phone to his ear. Whenever his call connected, he looked like he was mumbling at first. Small words spoken slowly. He started shaking his head frantically, blinking his eyes like he was trying to wake from a dream. Then, without warning, he was holding the phone in front of his mouth and screaming into it. Just raw anger, shouting into the mouthpiece of the phone, spit flying all over the screen. I could read his lips so clearly. It was like I could hear him shouting in my head over and over again. He yelled at the person on the other end of the line. "I hate you. I hate you. I hate you." And then suddenly, he looked at his cell with pure rage and threw it into the television, sending it crashing through the flat screen. It had to be at least 70 inches, and now it was destroyed. I jumped again and decided I'd watched enough for now. I didn't want him to see me, especially after an outburst like that. I left him to it and returned to work, hoping to get through a big project I was dragging my feet on. A local car dealership in town was going under, with new management already looking to take over once they threw in the towel. They wanted a design for the old lot spinning billboard, something sleek and new to scrub out the mom-and-pop look it had before it. There was talk of me doing the layout of their business cards as well if I delivered. All the more reason to climb out of my slump and get back to the grindstone. It'd be nice to focus on something constructive. I sat at my computer and pushed the new neighbor from my mind, plugging away into the night. I worked into the late hours, my mouse and keyboard clicking away as I found the right color scheme and layout on the billboard job. Time had been a blur. I had stopped eventually to brew a pot of coffee, getting up only to refill my mug. I checked the time at the bottom corner of my screen, 2:2:33 a.m. My progress had been pretty good, so I decided to call it a night. I stretched and headed to my bedroom, sprawling out as soon as I was off my feet. I looked up at the ceiling in the dark, feeling the caress of sleep already luring me. My eyes grew heavy, but before I closed them, I found them drifting to the blinds. I could just take a peek. What would it hurt? He probably wasn't even awake. There was no harm in checking after all. I sat up with a little excitement and creeped to the window and stood in the position I had done hundreds of times before. I cracked the blinds ever so slightly and leaned in. As soon as I looked at the condo across the street, goosebumps crawled across my skin. The new tenant was sitting on the couch with the lights off, illuminated only by the glow of his broken TV. The flat screen was a distorted mesh of colors, cracked black and white, with rainbow streaks from his tantrum earlier. He just sat there in silence, arms at his sides as he blankly stared. The cell phone was still lodged in the screen. I rubbed my eyes in skepticism, thinking maybe I was hallucinating. I'd been sitting in front of my computer for quite some time. Surely I was just imagining it. I looked again, and he was still there, frozen on the couch. What the hell was this guy doing? I watched for a while, going back and forth between his dead eyes and the destroyed screen. He didn't move a muscle. It almost looked like he wasn't breathing. It was hard to see how dark it was. The seconds ticked by as neither of us moved, and a voice in the back of my mind started to nag at me. What if he actually was dead? I remembered the monocular in my desk, and I broke my gaze to go retrieve it. I shivered as I walked over to it. The unsettling sight sent chills down my spine. I found myself rubbing my arms like the air conditioning had been blasting for too long. I got the monocular from the desk drawer and quickly returned to the window, discreetly angled it through the crack before looking through it. The looking glass exploded with color, and I realized I had it too far to the right. My entire view was the broken flat screen. I started panning the monocular slowly towards the couch, carefully trying not to rustle the blinds. When I reached the couch, I saw nothing but shining leather. He was gone. I lowered my looking glass in confusion, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Standing in front of the sliding door was the tenant, and he was looking right at me. I crouched in a panic, knocking my head on the windowsill. The blinds ruffled slightly, and I cursed at myself for being so stupid. I just had to look. I couldn't just leave him alone. And now he saw me. I continued to crouch like a coward, not exactly sure what to do next. In my few years of people watching, I'd never been seen, not once. This guy was full on staring at me. How he knew I was there in the first place, I had no idea. There was no easy way out now. I had to deal with my situation. Maybe if I tried to play it cool, he wouldn't call the cops, I guessed. I didn't really know. After a deep breath, I peeked as slow as I could, and he was still there, standing in the dark, staring at my window. Feeling like a piece of shit, I sighed and stood up. I pulled the drawstring for the blinds and held my hands up sheepishly, like to say my bad. I held my breath and waited for a response, but he just stood there awkwardly. We looked at each other for a time, neither of us breaking eye contact. I waited for him to get his phone and call the police or something, but then I remembered he threw it through his TV. I couldn't really make out the details from so far away, but I swore he was smiling. When the uneasiness reached its peak, I kind of shrugged and waved, as if to say, "All right, good night then." Then I slowly grabbed the drawstring and let the blinds fall. I felt embarrassed, but I didn't know what else to do. I backed away from the window and scurried to the front door, making sure it was locked. It was. My living room is pretty bare, with a very basic couch and TV setup. The blinds to my balcony are always closed. I don't smoke, so I've never really had a reason to go out on it. With my lights off and door locked, I stood behind the blinds, wondering if he was still watching. I mulled it over for a while deciding to look, and I held a breath before peeking. His living room was empty, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I wiped sweat from my brow, a bit surprised how worked up I'd gotten. It was probably just an awkward misunderstanding. Feeling exhausted over the whole thing, I returned to my bedroom and collapsed on my bed. I laid there for a while, tossing and turning restlessly in the dark. The silhouette of the man was still in my head, and I found myself picturing him every time I closed my eyes. Every time I get close to drifting off, I thought of him. Eventually, I rolled over and grabbed my phone and started scrolling online for something to give me some peace of mind. I found a set of decently priced blackout curtains and purchased them, deciding I was tired of blinds and tired of peeping altogether. I even paid a hefty amount to expedite the shipping. The site said they'd arrive the next day, and I sincerely hoped that they would. The next morning, I awoke disheveled. Throughout the night, I had recurring nightmares of the man across the street. Just him and that damn broken TV with a distorted screen. I kept seeing his shadow in the corner, only to wake up to an empty room. I felt ridiculous. After years of watching people, one person watches me, and I can't sleep all night. The irony was not lost on me. The vulnerability changed me. I almost cowered around the windows, and when it came time to sit down for work, I found myself looking over my shoulder. There was no one there, of course. I was just psyching myself out. In time, I started to focus on work, and I wrapped up the design of the dealership. After sending a preview to the client, I ended up scrolling online again, this time browsing for household self-defense. I didn't own a gun or anything for home protection, really. Not even a bat. It felt stupid, but I couldn't help myself. I still felt pretty rattled. I added one of those long flashlight baton things and a taser to the cart and expedited the shipping once again. It'd be better than nothing. Later that night, I got a knock at the door. I was on the couch playing on my phone when it happened. I got up and tiptoed to the door, almost not wanting to check. Looking through the peephole, I saw the delivery driver impatiently waiting for me to sign. I was still on edge, and the sight of him was a relief. I opened the door and signed for the package. The box was big and heavy, and I set it on the kitchen table. I opened it quickly and saw it was my blackout curtains. I guess this time the extra money was worth it. A little excited, I opened them up and carried them to my bedroom. They were thick black canvas, designed to black out direct sunlight. Hopefully they'd black out everything along with it. I got a drill from the closet and started taking the old blinds down, drawing the screws out one at a time. It wasn't until I was pulling them down I realized he was watching me. I couldn't help but jump. I dropped the blinds in a fumbling mess at the sight of him, a grin visible on his face this time. He was standing in the living room in front of the slider with the lights on, like he was waiting. How long had he been there? In the background, the flat screen still had the glitched spider web from his cell phone. I gave an awkward wave and tried to go about my business, but I couldn't help but notice he was holding something. Something white and rectangular. When he was sure he had my attention, he showed it to me, holding it in front of him so I could see it. It was a large poster board, a simple message drawn with big red letters. "I saw you watching me." I put my hands up and waved them, shaking my head as if to say this was just a misunderstanding. He shook his head slowly, like I was wrong. I made some more hand gestures to try and convince him, but he started turning the poster board over, which made me stop. There was more writing on the other side. I like to watch, too. I felt the knots in my stomach, and I got a chill. He was nodding slowly now, a big smile on his face. Panic started to wash over me, and I put up the blackout curtains with shaking hands. He saw me struggle and started to laugh, grabbing a marker while I tried to do my rushed install. He started scribbling with a cap in his mouth, and I started running screws above the window to speed the process up. I ran the screws through the curtains themselves and into the drywall, whirring the drill wildly while he scribbled. It was a hack job, but it would have to suffice. He put the poster board against the glass as I draped the curtains on the screws, and I only saw a glimpse before shutting the view completely. "See you soon." I backed away from the window and did the same as the night before. The door was locked, and I shut off all the lights. I didn't want him to see anything. I thought about calling the police, but decided against it. I thought back to all the times at the window, watching the Jeffersons dozens of times. Hundreds. In a way, I felt I deserved this. I spent all night huddled in my bed, my desk chair propped in front of my bedroom door. I didn't sleep. Every creak in the building or gust of wind sounded sinister. I looked at the bedroom window throughout the night, wondering if he was watching behind it. The need to look nagged at me throughout the night, but I fought against it. When daytime came, I was too tired to work and too anxious to eat. I laid on the couch for a while like a slug, unsure what to do. I moped around a house for a while, avoiding the windows. I tried to watch TV, but it couldn't hold my attention. I'm not sure how much time went by. The last thing I remember was checking the app for my online purchases, and there was an alert telling me my package was a few hours away from delivery. I snuggled up on the couch and decided to wait and ended up falling asleep. It was nighttime when I awoke to a faint flashing light. I was in the dark on the couch, my light still off in the morning. The light was blinking from under my front door, a repetitive flash that went into my dark living room. Disoriented, I shambled from the couch and turned on the light. Against my judgment, I looked in the peephole, only to see an empty hallway. I opened the door to see what the source of the light was. There was a small black trash bag on my doorstep, shining light shooting from a small hole where it was tied off. I stared at it for a while, the light just blinking over and over again. I looked down the hallway. There was no one there. I picked up the bag. Whatever was in there was strangely shaped and stiff. There was no way to tell what it was by feeling it. I had to open it. I wish to God I did. I brought it to the kitchen table and opened it with a knife. As soon as I punctured the plastic, a foul smell filled my apartment, and the knife came back sticky and red. I didn't want to open it. My hands just did it, and the more I pulled apart the bag, the worse it got. The overhead light illuminated the contents clearly. I collapsed next to the table and began to cry. Stuffed in the bloody trash bag was Cooper the stray cat, his jaw open in a petrified cry. There was a baton in his mouth, the lens strobing endlessly. The packaging receipt was stuffed in the bag too. A crude note scribbled in all caps. It read, "Why won't you let me watch? I don't know what to do now." I left Cooper in the sink, and I'm cowering in my room. I want to call the police, but I just can't. Part of me thinks this is just punishment for all that I've done, the privacy of others I've violated over the years. Maybe I do deserve whatever comes next. I thought I heard something on the balcony earlier. I wanted to look, but I was too scared. I ended up just staying in my room, and when things got quiet, I wrote this. It was a strange sound now that I think about it. There was some shuffling, but it had to be the wind or something. I live on the second floor. There's no way. There was a loud snapping noise too, like a crackling over and over again. Very weird. It's been a couple hours. The sun's starting to come up. I'm gonna post this and get dressed. I decided I'll come clean and go to the police. I'll tell them about the Jeffersons. The guy across the courtyard, Cooper, everything. I hope they can help me. The only thing that's bothering me is I haven't used my balcony in a long time. I can't remember the last time. I hope it's still locked. Cooper 911, what's your emergency? Hello? I'm being stalked. I need help. Being stalked? By whom? My neighbor. You're being stalked by your neighbor? Yes, I'm not safe. He's gonna get me. Okay, sir. Where are you now? I'll send a unit right away. No, you don't understand. I'm on my way to the police station right now. He killed Cooper. He killed who, sir? He killed Cooper. The cat. He killed the cat. He killed your cat? No, he's not my cat. He's just a cat. He's a stray. I'm bringing him with. You have to help me. Sir, how far away from the station are you? Where are you now? No. Sir? Oh my God. He's in my car. Sir, pull over. You need to. There was a panic scream, followed by an electric cracking over the phone. Muffled thumps and interference are all that can be heard from the caller's end, with a faint sound of squealing tires. Sir. The line goes dead. That was a transcript of a dispatch call to the sheriff's department. This was a couple weeks ago, and the man who called never made it to the station. I was not dispatched to this call, nor did I have any knowledge of it at the time. This is the only place I can tell this story, you guys being my only possible audience. I have to tell somebody. There will be specifics I will have to leave out, but I will tell you everything that I can. Maybe those who are looking can get some closure. It's the best I can do. I'm a police officer. I've only been in the force for 2 years. My dad was a cop in the big city, just like his father before him. He always said he wanted me to follow in his footsteps, but was ultimately shocked when I joined the department in the next town over. The city was too congested and noisy for me, and I wanted to try and make my own way without working under his shadow. There's something wrong in our town. It started 2 months ago, like a dark cloud that had hovered over our town and never left. The start of my career has been quiet, if I'm being honest. The extent of my police work consisted of traffic violations and petty theft, a wellness check every once in a while, or a call for domestic disturbance. It almost seemed a little easy, like maybe I should have joined the academy in the big city instead of this sleeping town. It all seemed to start when they found that girl under the bridge, the first murder in our town in a long time. I drive over that bridge every night to go home, and it serves as an odd reminder of how peaceful things used to be. Ever since then, things have been chaotic. There's always tension at the station. There's always calls to be answered. Some people go missing. Others call in to report strange sightings. It's like madness is looming in the distance. I was on the way home the night it happened. I just finished late on a night shift. I changed at the station and was driving home. Long stretches of back roads through farmland. I live in the country in my grandparents' old house. It's got some land, but it's really marshy. I had to start getting in my uniform at the station because my driveway is a muddy wreck. Most of my gear is at the station. The only things I had on me were my phone and a compact Ruger 9mm I carry when I'm off duty. It had been a long day, and I was ready to be home. Soon I could have a hot shower and a nightcap, and I'd be drifting off to sleep to do it all again tomorrow. I was on a very long stretch of RD. The headlights are the only light in the vast fields on either side. I had the radio playing lightly. It was some kind of seasonal ad for a local haunted house. I didn't care much for cheap scares, but I was listening anyway. An announcer was trying really hard to be edgy and spooky, talking of ghouls and frights, for the low price of $20 a ticket. I turned it up out of boredom and was surprised when it cut to loud static. I usually had good reception all the way home, so the interference was unusual. I sighed and changed the station, only to find more static. I tried them all, and they yielded the same result, and that's when I saw it out of the corner of my eye. It was a faint strobe of light to my left, and when I first looked, I thought it was just seeing things. It was brief and far away. I found myself slowing down to see if it would happen again. I crawled to 10 miles per hour, looking into the eerie darkness of the bean field. It happened again, a series of flashes that looked like they were coming from the trees across the field, almost like a signal from a flashlight. I stopped my vehicle, my gut twisting as I watched it, meanwhile the static blasting from the dash. The lights blinked, and then they were gone, and I was looking at nothing but a dark field with some trees in the distance. I checked the time. It was 1:39 a.m. I shut the radio off and sat there in silence. Aside from the loss of radio reception, something felt wrong, like someone was calling for help. Even with hunting season, it wasn't the time for hunters to be active. And nobody lived in this particular area. A few feet ahead, there was a beat-up gravel path, one of the lanes that farmers use to pull harvesting equipment in when they till the fields. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat and tried to ring the station. Holding the phone to my ear gave me nothing but a long silence. I looked at the screen to see I had no bars. There was no signal to get through. I mulled it over in my head. It was 10 minutes back to the station, and I was 5 minutes away from home. But if someone was in danger, they wouldn't have time for me to be digging around to find a landline. I wasn't in uniform, and there'd be no calling for backup. If something bigger was going on out there, I would just be as shit out of luck as the person calling for help. I tried the station again. Nothing. With my eyes on the dark gravel lane, I felt for my 9mm in my badge. I always kept it loaded, but I checked out of habit, half cocking the slide to make sure it was chambered. I didn't have a choice, really. I get my ass chewed for going without backup, and I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if someone couldn't escape danger because of my negligence. I left off the brake and turned into the path, my Suburban bouncing over the uneven ground. The headlights shined down the stretch of gravel, barely hitting the trees in the distance. I saw the eerie strobe again. It was coming from the forest, near the base of a tree. I periodically checked myself for reception, but was rewarded with the same results. Driving down that path filled me with anxiety. I kept scanning the trees for movement, for a sign of life or struggle. I'd start at where I saw the strobe, and I'd go from there. Hopefully by then I could get some kind of signal. The gravel lane ended with a tree line. There was a gap between the trees with waist-high weeds that looked like someone drove through them. I couldn't really see what was behind the weeds, and there was no visible path from here, so I took it as my cue to get out. I put the phone and badge in my pockets, then I grabbed the handgun. I decided to leave the car running and use the headlights for visibility. I stepped out into the chilly midnight air and felt the immediate squish of mud. I always wore my hiking boots because of my shitty driveway, and I was thankful to have them on now. I closed the door and tucked the handgun into my coat. A toxic smell wafted on the night air, like something burning. I looked back towards the dark road, wishing I could have called for backup. Leaving my truck behind, I headed towards the tracks and the weeds. Someone had definitely been through here. My boots sucked at the mud as I approached. Ahead, the weeds started to rustle, and I froze, pulling the gun and readying it tightly with both hands. I trailed my gun on the weeds, clicking the safety off and lining up the sights. White and black mass of fur slinked out, a collar jingling on its neck. It was a cat. With a sigh of relief, I lowered my weapon, and the cat meowed at the sight of me. It was a calico cat, his marbled fur untouched by the surrounding mud. It pranced up to me and purred loudly as it rubbed up against my leg. I knelt down and scratched its chin. "What are you doing all the way out here, little guy?" I asked as I pet him. The cat looked at me with intense eyes, its whole body radiating an odd warmth in the chilly air. After seconds of scratching and purring, I heard a loud popping in the distance, like a firecracker going off. I stood and looked into the forest, down the tracks of flattened weeds. There was a faint orange glow in the trees, but from what I couldn't make out. I decided to take the cat back to the truck, but when I looked down, it was gone. Confused, I looked around, but it was nowhere to be found. No meow, no jingle, nothing. Suddenly, being alone again gave me goosebumps, and I gripped the gun tighter as I scoped out my surroundings. Having no choice but to leave the mysterious cat behind, I headed into the forest to find the source of the noise. Once I started down the trail, the mud lessened with the foliage of the forest floor. The further I walked, the stronger the stench became, and a faint burning started hitting my eyes. Smoke. I couldn't really see it in the dark, and the headlights weren't helping as much as I'd hoped. I was embarrassed at my lack of preparation, but it was better than shrugging my shoulders and driving home. I followed the smoke, scanning the woods for any signs of movement. The glow ahead was slowly getting brighter, and I started walking faster. My adrenaline was rising, the gun held tight in front of me. Something was definitely burning. The smell was strong, and the smoke was getting thicker. It was like smog with hints of charred meat, like a cookout in the middle of a refinery. I chanced to look at my phone. No bars. I don't know why I expected anything different. I started running. The glow got brighter and brighter until I could see it radiating. There were trees and Brahma. Symbols blocking the view, but I pushed on. I needed to get there. Too much time has been wasted already. I ran through the weeds, blinking at the sting of smoke. My boots snapped twigs and kicked up leaves as I went. I could hear the fire now, the crackling and sizzling of something burning hot, and I could finally see the source. In the center of the clearing, a mini SUV sat like a ball of fire. Wicked tongues of flame licked from all sides, billowing black smoke trying to reach the sky through the crowded treetops. The twisted figure of what was once a person sat in the driver's seat, their contorted hands frozen in perpetual burning agony. Something brushed my leg and tore my gaze from the wreckage. The cat sat next to me. Its eyes locked ahead with a reflection of the roaring blaze in its eyes. It looked up at me for a moment, and then it turned to look at something off to the side of the fire. I followed his gaze. A man sat watching the fire. He was about 15 feet away, sitting with his chin resting on his knees. He stared intently into the flames, his hands messing with something in front of him. His face was emotionless, and he sat like he was enjoying a campfire on a cool summer night. I felt a panic rise within me, and I forced it away. I ran into the clearing, badge held up with my gun trained on him. Police. Hands where I can see him. I shouted. For a moment, he ignored me. He just kept looking at the fire. What are you doing here? I just wanted to watch, he said quietly, his hands gripping the object in front of him. It looked like a taser. I said, get your hands in the air now. I yelled again, and this time he looked at me, his blank face slowly turning to anger. He started getting up. The taser held at his side. Did you come to watch too? He said, taking a step closer. Take another step and I will shoot. I'm warning you. I shouted. There was a sizzling in the wreckage, one that was starting to slowly get louder. We both looked over, and right before our eyes, the hood of the SUV exploded. The sound rattled my ears, and I shielded myself from the debris as the wave of hot air threw bits of glass and metal. I looked up just in time to see the man rush towards me. As I tried to raise my weapon, he slammed into me, and the gun shot into the trees. We hit the ground in a running mess, my hip and elbow jarring into the ground. I lost my grip on the gun, and it tumbled away. With an electric crackle, the man thrust the taser down, and I put my hands up to fend him off. I grabbed his hands and held him off, the arcing tip inches from my face. I just have to play with you next, that's all, he said, and knee me in the stomach. I faltered, and he shoved the taser into my neck. The pain coursed through my body, and I involuntarily spasmed, like all my veins had caught fire at once. He laughed as I struggled, and I could only shut my eyes and suffer through it. He hit me again, and through my agony, I felt through the grass for something to fend him off. My teeth rattled as they were forced together, and I screamed as I convulsed onto my side. I felt the solid mold of my badge played in the grass, and as my twitching fingers wrapped around it, I squirmed for an opening. He grabbed the collar of my coat like he wanted to slam me on the ground. I slammed my palm inside his elbow to buckle his arm, but I was too weak. He laughed and ignited the taser again. And right then, I thrust the badge upward, shoving the point of the shield in his eye. He screamed and covered his face, trying to climb off and pull the shield out. I kicked him away and looked for the gun. I could barely make out its shape sticking out in the firelight. He stopped to pull the badge from his eye, tossing it into the weeds as I crawled for the gun. And with all my energy, I leapt for it. The man was grabbing for my ankles and trying to pull, but I whipped around and squeezed the trigger. 3 shots, center mass. He clutched his stomach and fell to his knees. Blood seeped through his fingers. With an exasperated groan, he fell over, his dead eyes resting on the fire. I sat up. Through the sounds of the inferno, I could hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance. My skin burned. The world spun as I coughed. The fire was getting bigger and consuming the grass surrounding it. I looked around for the cat, but it was nowhere to be found. When the cavalry showed up, I was put in an ambulance and treated. Minor scrapes and bruises, along with the burns from the taser. Nothing major. I'd recover in no time. I was thankful for the arrival, but I was confused on how they found me. Before the fire department drove back to put out the fire, one of the officers on the scene told me that the station had received several calls from drivers, all talking about a strobing light in the distance. Yeah, the funniest thing, the officer said, we didn't think we'd find anything. The only reason we were able to find you, well, there was a cat on the road. It just stood in the middle of the road. I almost hit the damn thing. When I stopped, it took off down the farmer's path, and I could see your car with its lights on. Could smell the smoke from the street, radioed it in. And the cat practically led us to you like a little guardian angel. Must have ran off, though. Some of these feral cats live off the mice in the fields. We see 'em all the time. Probably the most excitement it's had in a while. He chuckled, scratching his head. All I could think of was the fiery eyes of that cat as they closed up the ambulance and sent me on my way. The next day, I filed the incident report. I told him about everything. The strobing light, the car fire, the guy with the taser. There was a lot of information to go over, and I struggled to retain all the details. They pressed me on why I didn't call for backup, and when I said I had no signal, they treated me like I was lying. After some evaluations, they deemed me fit to leave. I was allowed to go, and I was given a couple days off to recuperate. While I was off, I eagerly awaited the news reports revolving around the incident. I left the TV on in hopes to catch it, and even browsed the web to find an article about it. It was strange. No network had coverage. There wasn't any mention of it. Social media was quiet, and there was no official statement made from the police department. I called one of my fellow officers, and they said something was going on at the station, that the perp's family had money. And they sent a representative to sweep everything under the rug. When I asked him to elaborate, he said there was some shady shit going down, and they were paying off everyone involved to keep their mouths shut. When I returned to work, it was like the whole thing never happened. Everyone kept their heads down, and when I asked him about it, they made up some kind of excuse or redirected me to the chief when I spoke to the chief. He said the investigation was no longer under our jurisdiction, and I needed to let it go, he said. An agent from the FBI turned up while I was on leave and collected all evidence that was for the investigation. When I tried to pry further, the tone seemed to change, and there were threats of suspension and possible relocation to a different department. I was given thorough instructions on what to say if the issue ever came up again, and I was reassured that the media had been handled. The chief said both men were deceased, and as far as they were concerned, it was an open and shut case. Further attempts to get information only angered him, and I left his office baffled with my head hung low. The rest of my day was an uncomfortable crawl. Eventually, I got to meet up with the officer I called while I was off, and he slipped me an envelope when we were away from everyone. He told me it was all that was left, that everything else had been pulled and labeled confidential. I looked through the envelope when I got home. It was just the positive IDs for the perp and the victim, and whatever forensics had been able to pull off the wreckage before they were locked out. As far as I know, this is the only physical evidence remaining of the incident altogether. I can't give you names, but they both lived in the same complex, and they lived across from each other. The driver who burned up in the car had lived in his condo for a couple of years and kept to himself the whole time he lived there. The perp, however, had just moved in a couple days prior. Neighbors said he had an expensive moving crew with lots of nice stuff. The department had gone door to door asking questions to the other tenants in the beginning, and the only thing they could tell us was that the perp was acting strange. There was no way of telling what really happened between them, but I later found the dispatch call that came from the driver in the car. After several online searches, I was able to learn more about the perp's family. They were extremely wealthy, like Gates and Bezos. There wasn't much on the perp himself, but I can only assume they moved him here because he was a problem child, or something like that. The landlord said the guy didn't personally apply for his apartment, that a representative did. The landlord made a statement saying something about generous donations for the district, and it was an offer he couldn't refuse. The forensics weren't as complete as I hoped. They were leaning towards electrical being the cause of fire, but were unable to draw any accurate conclusions before the investigation was pulled. The man behind the wheel had been badly burned, but there was residue of adhesive left behind, like he'd been duct taped to the seat when the car caught fire. They didn't get a chance to do an airway examination. Whether or not he was alive when the fire broke out is unknown. The only other thing they were able to find was the remains of an animal on the passenger side floor. It was hard to tell with the fire damage, but it seemed to be dead beforehand. This was concluded due to the large flashlight that seemed to be forced down the animal's throat. The temperature in the car fire had gotten so hot the flashlight had fused to the remains, and forensics were unable to remove it for further testing. If it wasn't for the file I have in my own eyewitness account, it's almost like this whole thing never happened. Nobody had spoken since the evidence was collected, and as the days go by, I find some of my fellow officers avoiding me altogether. Everything was business as usual at the department, and I was back to making my rounds and answering calls. Nobody ever reached out to follow up, and after a few weeks, I almost wondered if this whole thing was just my imagination. That was until I found a post online. It was a story from the point of view of a man in a condo, a man who loved to watch, and the cruel demise of a stray cat named Cooper. I'm going to link these stories together and save it because I think it's the closest thing I'll get to closure. I still take the same route home after work, just as I did the night it happened. Sometimes when I pass that farmer's lane, I'll catch static on the radio, and sometimes I feel like I'll catch something out of the corner of my eye. If I look fast enough, I swear I can see the strobe in the trees.